taking the smoke.
The movie begins in an ancient forest, where a group of old cult members is performing a strange and sacred ritual. The scene is spooky, and among the group is a man dressed in modern clothes, watching the ceremony. The leader of the ritual, an older native man, holds a special powder in a bowl. He mixes the powder with the blood of the modern man, and then sets it on fire, creating thick smoke that fills the area. The story then moves to the present day, where we meet an artist named Britney. She is showing her latest art pieces and getting lots of praise from people. Her manager, Jerry, is by her side, trying to flirt with her. Britney knows Jerry likes her, but she keeps her distance because she has a boyfriend named Edward, who she loves. However, Edward is not at the art show. Soon, Edward arrives at the event and sees Britney with Jerry. He quickly apologizes for being late, but Britney is upset and walks away, leaving Edward to face Jerry's comments. Edward follows Britney to another room and explains that his work at the lab caused the delay. Britney, though still angry, tells him he needs to stop ignoring her. She loves him, but his constant excuses are frustrating her. Edward apologizes and kisses her, and they share an intimate moment, not realizing that an old man is watching them from upstairs. Their moment is interrupted when Jerry enters and tells Britney that the crowd is asking for her. She leaves with Jerry, and Edward is left alone. The old man reveals himself, coming down in an elevator. Edward notices that the man is in a wheelchair and rushes to help him. The man thanks Edward, but Edward is surprised when the man calls him by his last name. Before Edward can ask how the man knows him, the stranger disappears when Edward tries to follow him. Later that night, Edward returns to his lab, where he is working on a dead body. As a scientist, he is trying to understand human thoughts and memories, particularly those of the dead. This body belongs to a serial killer, and Edward is trying to access his memories. While working, Jerry visits and suggests that Edward give up on Britney, saying he is too busy to care for her. Annoyed, Edward firmly tells Jerry that he loves Britney and will not let her go. He also makes it clear that Britney is not someone to be given away, and will make her own choices. To scare Jerry, Edward uses an electrode to move the corpse's hand, which frightens Jerry into leaving. Once Jerry is gone, Edward continues his work and successfully unlocks the serial killer's memories. However, the visions are horrific, filled with scenes of brutal murders. The killer's victims were all young women, killed in different places, some in baths, others at pools, and some on their way home from daily errands. Shocked by these disturbing images, Edward leaves the lab. The next day, Edward meets with his professor, who tells him that the board has decided to cancel his research and stop his funding. Edward is confused and argues that he is making progress and needs more time, but the professor says the decision is final and the funding is being redirected to another project. Meanwhile, Britney is working on a sculpture of a woman's body. Edward visits her, but they immediately start arguing. Britney is upset that Edward doesn't pay enough attention to her, while Edward tries to explain that his work is taking up all his time, leaving him exhausted. Frustrated, Britney insults him, and Edward leaves in anger. That night, when Edward returns home, he finds a stranger waiting for him. Grabbing a baseball bat, Edward thinks the man is a burglar, but it turns out to be the same old man from Britney's art show. The man apologizes for scaring Edward and invites him to dinner. Curious, Edward agrees. During dinner, the old man introduces himself as Everett Longstreet and tells Edward he knows him. Once again calling him by his last name, Edward asks Longstreet what he wants, and Longstreet offers Edward a chance to continue his research with unlimited funding. The catch is that when Longstreet dies, Edward must take on his identity and continue his work. Longstreet, a Nobel Prize-winning genetic engineer, chose Edward because of his potential. Edward, a fan of Longstreet's work, is interested, especially when Longstreet mentions a research paper that inspired Edward's own studies. Longstreet shows Edward his private lab, and reveals that he has been working with ancient shamanic potions for years. He is ready to pass his life's work on to Edward. Edward sees this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They start working together, and Edward tells Longstreet that although he has made progress, he is struggling to understand the human soul. Longstreet shows Edward an ancient technique that people use to connect with the soul. He sprinkles a mysterious powder into a bowl, cuts his hand, and lets the blood drip into it, similar to the ritual from the beginning of the movie. This time, Edward breathes in the smoke. Later, Longstreet asks Edward to play the piano. Even though Edward insists he can't play, Longstreet encourages him to try. To his surprise, Edward plays the piano beautifully, as if he had been playing all his life. Edward is amazed, feeling as if he had become Longstreet for a moment. He experiences Longstreet's memories and thoughts, even saying it felt incredible. Longstreet is also surprised at how the ancient method worked, although he admits he still doesn't fully understand it. That night, Edward goes home, but as soon as he walks into the kitchen, he sees a dead woman on the floor. Shocked, he turns on the lights, only to realize she isn't there. It was just a hallucination. Edward tells himself he needs sleep and takes a break, but even in his sleep, he has nightmares. In one dream, a beautiful woman is with him, surrounded by candles. She starts to seduce him, but before anything else happens, the shaman from earlier appears and frightens him. The next morning, scared by the dream, Edward goes to the hospital for a checkup. The doctor finds nothing wrong, but Edward brushes off further tests, saying he just needs more rest. Later, he visits Longstreet's lab and is surprised to find all his equipment has been moved there. Feeling unsure, he doesn't question it. During their conversation, Longstreet mentions his wife, and Edward asks if she is living in the house. Longstreet replies that they divorced long ago and she has since passed away. Edward doesn't think much of it and leaves. Edward returns to his professor and asks if he knows anything about Longstreet. The professor doesn't offer much information, but warns Edward to be careful when working with strangers. Back at Longstreet's lab, Edward performs an experiment on a rat. He uses a neurotransmitter to connect with the rat's thoughts and experiences the maze the rat is running through. He even feels like he has become the rat himself. Afterward, Edward tells Longstreet that the connection felt deep, almost reaching the soul. However, the rat bites Edward's hand, and his reaction seems odd, as if he wasn't fully in control.
I could feel his fear, his frustration, his determination to find the food once I...
Later, Edward takes a nap, but he is disturbed by more nightmares of the serial killer's memories. They feel so real, as if he had committed the murders himself. Waking up in fear, Edward leaves the room, only to encounter a woman who calls him her husband, Longstreet. Edward doesn't recognize her and realizes it is another hallucination. Now fully awake, Edward starts to wonder if he's losing his mind. At the same time, Britney wakes up from her own nightmare, worried about where Edward might be. The following day, Longstreet arrives at the lab with a bottle of champagne to celebrate their recent progress. Edward takes the bottle, and just then, Britney shows up, wanting to talk privately with him. Longstreet seems nervous around her because of her beauty. Edward and Britney head to his bedroom where they become close. While they are together, Longstreet secretly uses the computer to activate the neurotransmitter, which allows him to feel what Edward is experiencing with Britney. This pleases him. Afterward, Longstreet goes to the lab and fills himself with a special potion. The next day, Longstreet meets with Edward like nothing happened. Edward explains that he plans to study the chemical structure of the neurotransmitters, code them, and upload them to the computer. This reassures Longstreet that Edward is the right person for his plan and that he is getting closer to his goal. Edward says he will not only be able to transfer his memories, but also his soul into the computer. This makes Longstreet smile in a dark way. Soon after, Edward starts the program on the computer and gets ready to enter the chamber to upload his identity. This is when Longstreet's true plan unfolds. The chamber fills with smoke, trapping Edward inside. Edward tries to escape, but eventually collapses.
Everett! Why?
When When everything turns dark, Edward sees flashes of both his memories and those of a serial killer. He steps out of the chamber and is shocked to see that he now looks like the old Longstreet. Meanwhile, the younger version of Edward burns the research files and CDs, but in reality, Longstreet has taken over Edward's body. Things go wrong for Edward, who is now stuck in Longstreet's old body. He realizes that everything in the lab is gone, and the computer's data has been erased by Longstreet. Edward struggles to breathe in his new body and thinks he's having a heart attack. While looking for a phone, he finds a photo of Longstreet's wife, the woman from his earlier visions. He finally finds a phone, but before he can explain what happened, he collapses. As Longstreet, now pretending to be Edward, he goes to visit Britney. When he finds her with another man named Jerry, he gets angry and beats him up. This surprises Longstreet, as he doesn't understand why he's acting this way. Britney, upset by his behavior, questions him. To calm her down, Longstreet tells her he bought the whole building for her. Britney is suspicious and asks how he got the money. Longstreet lies, saying the real Longstreet had a heart attack and left everything to him. Britney tries to understand, but his rude behavior makes her angry, and she walks away. Feeling frustrated, Longstreet drives away. He gets into a confrontation with another driver and punches him. Confused by his own anger, he leaves when he hears police sirens. Later, a beggar asks him for money, but Longstreet punches the man instead and runs away. Scared, as he drives, he begins to see visions of the serial killer's crimes, just like Edward used to. Now, Longstreet, in Edward's body, is haunted by the same terrifying memories. Meanwhile, the real Edward, trapped in Longstreet's old body, wakes up in the hospital after a heart attack. When he tells the nurse that his body was taken over, she laughs and reassures him that he'll get the help he needs. The doctor later explains that Edward had a heart attack and showed high levels of a dangerous chemical in his blood. Longstreet, still in Edward's body, becomes more affected by the killer's memories. He goes to Britney's house with the intent to harm her. He finds her sleeping, but before he can do anything, the police arrive. He hides while the police ask Britney if she has seen Edward. After they leave, Britney is about to call Jerry for help when Longstreet sneaks up behind her, scaring her. Later, Longstreet returns to the lab, hoping to find the old Longstreet's body. When he doesn't, he goes to the hospital to confront Edward. He is surprised to see that Edward is still alive. Edward tells Longstreet that he knew this would happen and reminds him that whoever holds the serial killer's memories will be haunted by them. Now, Longstreet is suffering the same way Edward did. Just when it seems like everything might be fixed, Longstreet reveals his plan. He tells Edward that he has Britney captive and will harm her unless Edward agrees to reset the process and erase the killer's memories. Edward has no choice but to comply. Back at the lab, Longstreet holds both Edward and Britney captive. Britney is confused and scared, not understanding why her boyfriend is acting this way. With Edward's help, Longstreet starts the process of resetting the program, but before it begins, Longstreet shoots the old Edward. Britney rushes to Edward's side, and he tells her to stop the system by inserting a hidden CD into the computer. As Longstreet enters the chamber and inhales the smoke, intense visions of murders and memories flood his mind. He sees the serial killer ending his own life. Meanwhile, Britney finds the hidden CD containing Edward's memories and uploads it into the system. All of Edward's memories, including his happy moments with Britney, are restored. Edward steps out of the chamber, free from Longstreet's control. Britney runs to him, and they share a moment of relief and love after everything they've been through. Did this story spook you out? Let us know in the comments below. For more horror movie recaps, subscribe to our channel and we will see you in the next one. Fear awaits you.